What's up, everybody? We are live again on Facebook with Mr. Eric NYMAN, everybody. Eric, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back, Alec.
Good to see you. Oh,
Make
you
the
okay?
cat on the lap. Yeah.
What is up, man? It is good to see you.
Likewise. Yeah, I'm glad we overcame our technical difficulties and got together again finally.
Sounds like we have a third party trying
Oh,
to get involved in
yes.
this interview.
Frankie is a
Hello
little
there.
disturbed about Mr. Gimbals there, so
Yes.
he'll calm down shortly. It's all right, Frank.
Yes.
You're a good boy.
Oh, my goodness.
Yes, Alec.
It's so unfair, isn't it? So unfair. Oh, my goodness. Eric, when last we met, we had a really great discussion. For those of you who might not have seen us last time, Eric and I met online very recently. Eric is a local food vendor where I live in Vineland. I, of course, am Alec. I am an author. I am a published author who works primarily with faith-based fantasy, trying to make disciples through storytelling. And I'm all about wellness. And while I do primarily focus on spiritual wellness, it is very important to me and my wife and pretty much everybody in our close circle, I'm noticing, to be nutritionally healthy. And one of the most nutritious places that I can eat at is known as, let me know if I'm saying it right, the Wildflower Vegan Cafe.
Sounds right to me.
And Eric here is the head chef and owner, who has been, how long have you been running the business now?
Yeah, it's about 15 years counting the lunch truck, but we've been open in Millville since January 2011. So say 14 and a half years since, you and Carrie have been able to come there.
That's right. And I didn't even start coming until, oh gosh, I think 2019, no, might have been more like 2017, might have been my first time. But I didn't start coming regularly until very recently. And boy, was I missing out. Eric's recipes are some of the greatest, freshest and most, delicious and nutritious. I didn't just put that in the box description to be funny, If you're a vegan and you've been told your entire life that if you don't eat meat, you eat grass, essentially carrots and grass, you worry in the beginning if you're going to have any delicious food anymore. And if I could think of one vegan place that makes food that is highly nutritious, but also absolutely delicious, I mean, you don't miss meat at all, I would have to pick Wildflower. Eric, how do you do it? What is your secret?
Thanks, Alec. Well, I mean, I prioritize the ingredients, and we try to get organic and local, and all non-GMO, no artificial, funny business. As close to nature as you can get it. And I trust my staff to make food that they enjoy making. So a lot of our recipes are not real hard line. You must measure exactly this. Some things like the dressings and for baking, you need to do that. But a lot of the other stuff, like you talked about, not missing meat, we make a seitan, which was invented by Buddhist monks millennia ago. They went to the monastery and they missed meat, and they made the stuff out of wheat flour. And we've just been perfecting it over the years. I remember years ago, one of the girls who used to work with us, Tony, said, "You know what? Add some tomato paste. That'll make it more gristly." And, a couple years ago, Kim figured out, let's puree the vegetables and we'll get a juicier texture. I mean, this last batch was like teriyaki barbecue or something. It was really juicy and vibrant, and no one would miss the animal substitute at all. I mean, we put it in wraps or on salads, but you could certainly make a nice cheesesteak or something with it. And we've been experimenting. Oh, there I am.
That was on my end. No worries.
Okay. But I mean, I really tend to cook simply at home, and, the Whole Foods ingredients. I mean, I just made some lentils, throw a cube of bouillon in there, a little earth balance, and I cut up a couple carrots, boil that, kind of scorched it a little bit. It had a nice smoky flavor. So, you don't really need to go crazy to make stuff that's fulfilling and very good for you.
No, absolutely. And that's been one of the things that I've been learning as I've gone forward on my own vegan journey. I'll tell you something very interesting that happened. In the beginning, I was looking at some of the more complex recipes, and Carrie and I, when we were first married, and we were living an hour away from Wildflower, where I used to live in Mystic Island, we were we had an Acme in town, an Acme and a Walmart, and a ShopRite about 20 minutes out of town. And we would buy the Gardein brand of meat a lot. Gardein chicken, Gardein meatballs, Gardein this, Gardein that. That was our brand for, I would say, 2 to 3 years almost. We stopped eating it very recently because Carrie in particular started to feel pretty heavy and weighed down after consuming that, and we started paying more attention to ingredients on the bags. We just started cooking a lot fresher, and that brings me back to what you said about how, yeah, ever since I've been cooking fresher, I've not only been cooking tastier, but I've been cooking simpler.
Yep.
I mean, simplest things like a good can of beans, a good bowl, a good bag of rice, a nice, hunk of tofu, or even just vegetables, beans, vegetables, and rice. I've made tremendous meals out of that.
Yep. Yep. And I don't want to knock the Gardein and the processed meats. I think, they have a place, quick meal. They're filling for people who are looking to transition and move away from animal protein. They're really drop-in replacement. You don't have to change anything else about your recipes. But you're right. They are a little heavier. I feel like they might be a little rougher on the digestive system. So I think they're good as a occasional fallback. But some people thrive on them. I mean, my son's 15 years old. He loves that stuff. He's on the volleyball team. He's doing great with that. So I guess we're all a little different in terms. And really, our digestive system adapts to what you feed it. So.
That's right.
I mean, we all know people who eat junk and seem to be doing just fine. And sometimes it catches up with you later in life. But I think the closest we can get to things in nature is going to be the best in the long run and the most fulfilling in the short run. And, the ideal. That's the ideal, Yeah.
But I mean, I know I brought it up last time, but I got to bring it up again because I've been getting it every time that I come to see you lately. But Eric has a salad called the Rock and Ranch salad, which is one of my favorite things that I've ever eaten in my life. And it's just to the point you just made, I've spent my life engorging myself on French fries. And somebody made this point to somebody who I recommended Wildflower to recently. I don't know if they came in or not, was talking to me about how they told somebody else, take away the oil and the salt and taste that and tell me how it tastes. And they tried it and they threw the whole box out. They were like, this is disgusting. I don't like French fries anymore without the deep fried oil and salt. But the thing that I noticed was that with the box of French fries, I was eating empty calories. But with your salad that was loaded with greens and chickpeas and all this other tasty good stuff in it, I was so full. I was getting like good calories. I was like, man, I feel like I'm ready to get into the boxing ring right now.
Oh, good. And we call that a power salad because it has a triple threat of protein. You have the chickpeas and then the textured vegetable protein, a little bit of soy protein for the bacon bits and the sunflower seeds. So all of those three items are high in protein. And then, the vegetables are going to have your carbohydrates and vitamins. It's I thought you were talking about having to throw out your friend throwing out the salad because they didn't put dressing on it because the dressing is fat. And if you're trying to lose weight or if you're trying to reverse a serious condition like heart disease or cancer, you could do an oil-free dressing. You could do apple cider vinegar and lemon juice. And, you don't have to put oil. I think most of us do okay with a little bit of fat in our diets. You can get that from whole foods like nuts and seeds and avocado. But if you're trying to cure yourself of a serious condition, they recommend cut out the salt, cut out the sugar, and cut out the fat. And if the fat's occurring in a whole food, it's okay, but oil is concentrated fat. So like that ranch dressing, it's vegan mayonnaise, the Vegenaise brand, which if you buy it at home, get the grapeseed oil one. It's the healthiest and the tastiest. But vegan mayo, a little bit of vinegar, a little bit of organic soy milk to thin it out, salt, pepper, onion, garlic, parsley, dill. I think that's it, So but the key is when you combine them fresh, you might see a dressing in the store with the same ingredients, but because it was mixed up 6 months ago and sitting in a, airtight preserved container, it's just not the same. I think we talked about this last time I was on your show too, about storing vegetables so they stay fresh. And it's sort of, if you keep your ingredients separate until you're going to eat them, and then you put them together, it just goes a long way for that freshness. And even like, you make a bean burger or something, you crack a little fresh cracked black pepper on there. I don't have the salt grinder, but some people do that with salt too.
I have a question for you.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to be honest. Everywhere I've gone for a bean burger, and I've been going for years for a bean. Before I was vegan, I had bean burgers, and I've had them all over the state. And every single one I've had tastes completely different, has a different texture, has a different set of ingredients. I can't trust a bean burger. So my question for you is, what is the secret to a great bean burger?
Well, again, I thought you were going to say every time I eat one of your burgers, it's different, because that's one of the things, not like the dressing, which we make the same every time, but the burger is going to change a little bit batch to batch. So I'm thinking of a black bean burger. One of our interns, Giovanni, made a bean burger inspired by, some of the things he likes to eat at home, and he seasoned it and sort of cumin and garlic, sort of like taco seasonings. And it was very tasty, but it had a fantastically soft and moist texture, but it held together. And one of my guys, Joey, figured this out maybe within the past year, a little bit of psyllium husk. And they sell psyllium as a digestive aid. It's I don't know if it's exactly a seed. I think it's the hull of a seed, but a little bit of psyllium works great as a binder. And we've tried different things like flax seeds and, like ground flax seeds and water, but a little psyllium husk, and we're talking like, maybe a quarter cup for 50 burgers or something, just a small amount that helps hold them together. Cause when I used to make bean burgers, they would tend to crumble apart into,
some of those places I went, I was just telling you about, I would grab one, it would crumble apart. I'm like, well, no, your bean burgers I love, of course.
It's finding the right amount of glue to put it. No, it's but yeah, the burgers. So it's just constant refinement, constant improvement, being open to take chances. In the early days, we used to roast a big tray of sweet potatoes and get in there with a big, like 4-foot long masher and, mash the sweet potatoes with the beans. At some point, we started using the food processor to blend them up to puree it a little bit smoother. So if you're using the right ingredients, there's a million ways, forgive me to use a very non-vegan expression, but, a lot of ways to skin a cat.
Right. Absolutely.
So I remember years ago, I went to the farm sanctuary in upstate New York in Watkins Glen, and this was probably the first farmed animal sanctuary. They were selling tofu hot dogs in the 70s out of their Volkswagen bus, and they rescued a goat from the scrapyard, the dead pile at a slaughterhouse, and nursed her back to health. They had the goat in the van with the hot dogs. We keep our animals a little separate from the food nowadays, but farm sanctuary. I remember reading a book called the World Peace Diet by Will Tuttle, and if we want to talk about spirituality and veganism and diet, we could come back to that. But the reason I brought that up is that for free, when you bought this book, he'd sign it, and he'd give you a little piece of paper that he called his cookbook. And it was labeled intuitive cooking. And it was like the anti-recipes. It's like, add some fresh dill to taste, add this to taste. It was just the broadest of outlines of what you could make. And as long as you didn't go wild with it, trust your palate, you could make something that was really nice. And I have a lot of respect for the recipe followers. I'll do it myself sometimes, but the way I cook and the way a lot of my staff cooks is sort of intuitive. And
I love that.
Oh, we're out of this today, but this is in season. Let's use that. And how much to put in it? I don't know, maybe 3. All right, 3.5, 4. You kind of just taste and feel it out. But the more you do this, those of us who've been doing it for a long time, you don't even need to taste anymore. Sometimes you dump this in and dump that in, and you mix it up, and it's right. At the end, you taste it just to be safe, but it's all muscle memory, I guess. So just with any task, and
I do a lot of work with, reading and writing and, managing and directing and telling people, no, you can't go to the bathroom right now. So, I mean, like I find it a release sometimes when I don't have a recipe and I'm alone in the house and I'm in the kitchen and I can just take things out of the cabinet, take things out of the refrigerator and just look at them and just like, lay them out in front of me and look at them and then be like, oh, I see how this could go together on a nice plate. And I mean, I find it to be almost like almost like a mindfulness exercise,
Yeah. Yeah. You can, once you've sort of understand the underlying concepts of how the different ingredients will interact with each other. And, the Ayurvedic cooking, they try to work in 5 different things, components to each meal, like with sweet, savory, bitter, salty, something else. But, it's sort of, you learn the techniques and then you can do whatever, someone could give you a vegetable that looks like it was grown on an alien planet, like a kohlrabi or something. And, you get in there and you realize, well, it's just another squash, cut it up. Can you eat the skin? Well, yeah, but maybe it's a little tough. Maybe cook it a little until it's soft. There are limits to this. I mean, there's a handful of plants that, you can eat this part, but not that part. Potatoes, you don't want to eat the leaves. Rhubarb, the leaves will kill you, but the stem is okay. There's a handful of them like that. But the vast majority of the plants you can buy at a farm stand or in the supermarket, more of them are actually edible than you're used to. I was on a kick some years ago about trying to eat cantaloupe seeds and things because I read they were edible. And I was like, well, the seed's going to have more protein and nutrients than the fruit, which has more sugar and flavor. I mean, I love melons, but, I was eating the cantaloupe seeds, but maybe it would have been better to roast them or something. Sometimes a little bit of cooking can make the food more palatable or more versatile, for Halloween, when we carve pumpkins, I try to always roast the seeds. If we're roasting butternut squash in the fall, try to roast the seeds. Apples, you can eat the whole apple. There's a little arsenic in the seeds, but it's a small enough concentration that your body can handle it. So some of that, I wonder about all the health issues people face these days. And, some of it's got to be environmental and plastic and all that. And, but some of it's, I think we eat less of the food than we used to, and if you were growing food and it was sort of in limited quantity, you were preserving what you couldn't eat right away. You were canning it, pickling it, freezing it when that became available, fermenting it. The way a lot of restaurants make soup stock, they're throwing all the bits and bobs of the vegetable scraps in there, stuff like, should I be eating that? I don't know. I mean,
exactly.
we're a little more sanitized at the restaurant for that. So I don't go that far, but I've seen, the traditional soup making. I was like, wow, really, I guess if there's a little dirt in there, it just settles to the bottom eventually. So
I love stories like that. Like when you go back through history and you find out, like I was just in history class one day, just listening to a torrent of stuff, and we happened to be, I think it was either in France. I think we were in France, yeah.
Wow.
And it turned out that people just found out if they soaked their stale bread in egg, they could revive it, and so we got French toast. And I was like, oh, how about that?
Love French toast. And there's so many ways to veganize it, which with even if you don't think you care about chickens, what's going on with the bird flu these days, we might, as a people, want to move away from eggs for many reasons. You can make it with bananas. You can make it with silken tofu. You can make it with the Just Egg product in the store, which is made from mung beans. There's a million ways to make delicious vegan French toast that has no impact on the animals or, minimal, far less impact on the environment. Isn't going to be clogging up your arteries or putting workers at risk. I don't know if you can still hear my dog. He's over there. Frankie. It's all right.
Yep, I see him. He's a cutie.
He's a
welcome part of the show.
Yeah. Hey,
What
Frank.
is the environmental impact of people going vegan?
You know, I should look up some stats for you on that because I'm a little rusty with these numbers. I mean, I one estimate was that a vegan saves at least 100 animals a year. It might be more than that now, just by not directly not eating them. I actually think it might be much higher than that. But feeding food to food is massively inefficient. So if you look at grain grown in this country, something like 90% of it is used for animal feed. If you look at the fishing industry, something like 90% of what they catch and kill is a waste product. Like I couldn't run my business like that and say, oh, I'm going to buy 10 pounds of lettuce, but I'm only going to feed you 1 pound of it and throw the rest out.
Mhm.
Animal agriculture is the largest cause of global warming. I mean, in terms of individual deaths, it's over 10 billion land animals a year, many times over that in terms of aquatic life. It's just so massively inefficient, so environmentally devastative. It's got to go. And really,
Mhm.
I'm a little disappointed it's not happening faster in terms of us divesting from the slaughter industry. So I challenge your viewers to sign up for a cease slaughter and go plant based. Be as vegan as you can be. I wouldn't beat yourself up if sometimes you're not 100% there, but it's the thing to aim for. Environmentally, study after study just shows how devastative the animal agriculture industries are. The depopulation of wild animals, the USDA Wildlife Services exterminates all sorts of beautiful creatures like foxes and wolves, and then the collateral is sometimes people's pets, birds, all sorts of things to protect farmed animals for their short miserable life.
Mhm.
Um, it just if you call yourself an environmentalist, you want to be as vegan as you can be.
Right. No, that's very interesting. And you mentioned something earlier that I really liked. You mentioned that in your research, you discovered a spiritual link to veganism. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure, and this was for vegetarians through the ages. It was often a spiritual calling. Certain monastic orders and certain religious groups. The Jains in India. Um, you know, didn't eat meat at least. They might have not been as strict with some other animal products, but
Hmm.
it's always been linked to sort of cleansing the spirit. If instead of participating in the killing of another sentient being that didn't want to die, you say, not for me. Now, I think there can be a selfishness to that, and that's not bad if you're coming out of self-preservation and trying to be just be healthy and you know feel good about your how you live. But I think it's only in recent times, really the past couple 100 years, that there's been enough of a movement to say, you know what, yeah, I'm opting out of the slaughter industry because I don't feel good about it. But we finally have the technology and the numbers and the ability to spread information that we as a species can say, it's not just a personal choice. I don't want to hurt animals, so I'm not into that, but my neighbor's going to, and that's their business. And it is their
Hmm.
business what they eat. But by supporting an industry that's so violent and really so terrible, when there are so many options now, humanity's massively resilient. You have billions of people all over the world eating all sorts of different fantastic and interesting, takes on survival. There's cultures like the Inuit near the Arctic Circle that eat almost all meat, and then you have groups like in India who eat almost all vegetables, or at least grain, seeds, not animals, um, and everything in between.
Yeah.
But with the advent of factory farming in the
Hmm.
past 70 years or so, it's allowed the Western animal product consumption to skyrocket. So our, the standard American diet these days is very different than however long humanity's been here has been eating.
Oh yeah. Our standard American lifestyle is very different than than about 98% of human history.
Yeah. And unfortunately, we're sort of the role model for the world in some ways, or at least we used to be. So a lot of that has been carried over to like, well, we'll eat more meat,
Yeah. I mean, I have even heard biblical comparisons made to, like, in certain Christian circles. If you look at the book of Genesis, for instance, and it talks about all the fruits and vegetables that were made for Adam to eat, it's like, yeah, no, like there's no evidence of animals being hunted or skinned or killed or used for consumption anyway until we get far into the the era of human corruption.
Yeah.
And I also think of, like, before TV, poets like myself, I'm not a great poet, but poets would, go out to the park and they would perform and they would muse at people and they would, sing and sermonize and this and that. And now it's like, well, let's put a camera on him and let's, link up on our computers because that's where we spend all of our time. It's like, just in a variety of topics, we live in such a microcosm of just a different lifestyle, a digitized, commercialized, very ad heavy. I don't even know what I'm trying to say here. It's
it's different for sure. The way we exist now is radically different than the vast majority of human and even non-human beings have lived ever. No question about that. Technology has radically changed how we exist, and it keeps happening faster and faster. So as we embrace technology, whether that's a good or bad or in likelihood a mixed bag, because even when the telegraph came out, people were writing about, oh, this is going to be the collapse of civilization, all our cultural things are going to go away because now we can talk to people halfway around the world and short sentences. It's nothing new. The concern, and the concern is certainly valid. But we as a people, I mean, humanity is like a force of nature now. But you could say nature has its own rules and thing. It's maybe amoral or it's just nature, creation, you might say. Whereas we have agency, and if we have all this power to mess up the world, through pollution or factory farming or human enslavement, all sorts of terrible things. Just because we can doesn't mean it's okay. If a volcano goes off, we can say, well, that was an act of God, an act of nature. Mm-hmm. It is what it is. We don't need to feel guilty about it, right? But if a human has the same, if or a group of humans has the same sort of devastative impact as a volcano or a tsunami or any of these naturally occurring, forces of nature, that's within our control, isn't it? Don't we have a responsibility to not be careless and cause unnecessary volcanic eruptions and tsunamis? If we don't go extinct soon, we'll be doing more things like that. I want to rewind a little bit to the technology question, though, because although we can, it's fun to say screens and all this stuff. When I was a kid, because
there's in my day,
yeah. But remember, in maybe our great grandparents' day or great grandparents' day, a lot of kids went to work at 5 years old for 14 hours a day in hazardous, unhealthy conditions. I mean, a lot of the advancements of technology have benefited with a broad stroke, humanity. So we have more distraction culture, and we could say we've lost a lot. But some of the stuff we've lost is good. I'm glad we lost some of that stuff. So it's all rolled together. We're a work in progress, I think. Mm-hmm. I think, it's, and that's why I think it's so important to come back to the veganism thing. Just like we're caught up in all of these different processes happening, and some maybe our individual application of effort might not seem to matter, but collectively, we're on track to massively shift how we live, and whether we want to be or not, it's already happening. We can't
Yeah.
very easily live like people lived even 30 years ago. And some of us maybe say, all right, I'm going to go live in the woods or something. And, maybe you can, it's appealing, but, that's you or me or a small group of us. What about we have 8-9 billion people on the planet now. What about them?
Good question. Let me ask AI. Speaking of technology.
Yeah.
Yep. I had also asked the BBC. This BBC says 7 reasons people go vegan. To back us up, the number 1 is animal cruelty and ethics argument. Another is going green for the environment, health reasons, personal autonomy, and challenging the status quo, social media, and the vegan revolution. So that goes and greater opportunities for going vegan and celebrity endorsement. So that takes us right back to what you were just saying about how technology has been helpful in bringing about this change.
Yeah. I mean, there's parts of the world where it's hard to grow vegetables. It's easy to grow sheep or yaks or something, with global trade, it's no big deal for us to import some soybean from a few states over, or you can grow it here. There's a farm that grows soybeans for animal feed about 6 miles from where I am. You can grow all these things that you think of being, that's indigenous to China, or you must have to go halfway around the world for that ingredient. Well, we can grow it right here, and we do. So, yeah, it's an interesting time to be in.
So I'm curious about something, because I've growing up in South New Jersey, I've noticed that, we do have an abundance of farmland. We're very blessed to have a lot of natural vegetables nearby. So would you say that this is one of the easier locations to launch a vegan business in? And I'm curious where you think it's the hardest.
Well, I can't say I've really tried operating a vegan business anywhere other than South Jersey. So it's tough to know. I'll tell you, I grew up in Lake Hopatcong, which is about an hour west of New York City and an hour east of the Delaware Water Gap. And, even 40 years ago, there was a vegan restaurant in North, Veggie Heaven. They had one in Teaneck and one in Piscataway, I believe. Parsippany moved to Denville, and Montclair. I used to take the philosophy club to the Veggie Heaven for lunch at Montclair. So years ago, there were vegan restaurants in North Jersey, many of which still exist. There's even more. South Jersey, you had the Frog Pond in Rosenhain, which I still have people, the guy who redid my kitchen said, oh, yeah, I was friends with the guy who, the Frog Pond guy, he was a good builder, too. I think that's when he sold the restaurant. I think he went back to carpentry full time. I was like, oh, how was his food? He's like, oh, I didn't eat that. I'm not that way. I was like, oh, what, you can't eat a vegetable? It's funny that block people have. I think it's getting less and less, but every so often you hear someone, oh no, I can't eat a veggie burger. Why not? I get it if you're against processed food and it's like an Impossible Burger or something that is very processed and maybe not the healthiest thing. But if it's like an old school veggie burger that's like beans and vegetables, the burger's just the patty, the shape of the food. Why would that be offensive to anyone? So maybe that might be an interesting deep dive psychologically if you ever get like someone who's better qualified to speculate about those kind of things.
No. It's just a fun thing to think about. Yeah.
Restaurants. I mean, so South Jersey was easy because there was, by the time we opened, there was nothing else. There was another vegan place called Zizi's To Go, which became Amani's Veggie Garden in Merchantville. They closed right before we opened. So, in 2011, we opened in Millville. There was no game in town, for a good hour, unless you went to Philadelphia. There were maybe 2 vegan places, unless you went to North Jersey, maybe, a handful again. Nowadays, Greens and Grains is a plant-based eatery, and they have
Yep.
excellent smoothies and juices, and some good lunch stuff. They do a mix. They have some stuff that's pretty healthy,
Yep.
and some stuff that's a little more like comfort food junky, but tastes good.
Oh, we know.
They're
Oh,
in
we
Philly.
know.
They're in the Philly, the baseball place in Philadelphia, the stadium. They have a location there, and they franchised them. They've done very well.
Yeah.
So east of here, you have a lot of vegan options. Cumberland County, apparently, I'm the only one who's sticking it out. But there's less people here. There's more poverty and there's less people in the immediate area that we are in. So it's challenging for businesses in general. And I think if you go to places where there's more people and more money, in one sense, it's easier because the pool of interest is larger. But in another sense, it's harder because a lot of places in those areas have options. So, I mean, for WILDFLOWER in South Jersey, we're not only the only vegan option, for Cumberland County, we're the only healthy option, I think, for even people who still eat animals. Not a lot of places to get a good salad, not a lot of places that source local and organic and do the non-GMO thing, and careful what kind of oils we use. And but as you go to more affluent areas, there are more people who want to eat that way. So the line between strictly vegan and just healthier is a little blurrier, because a lot of plenty of nice places you can get a great salad. You can get a great vegetable dish. And if you don't see something on the menu that's already vegan, don't be afraid to ask. A lot of times the chef would love a challenge or do something a little bit different, at a nice sit down restaurant where they're going to have to put some time into making the meal regardless. You go to a hot dog stand and you ask them to make you a Buddha bowl, they might look at you a little funny. Where we give you one hot dog with everything, right? It's,
First of all, do you have this shaped bowl?
yeah. It's okay if it's a bread bowl.
Yes.
So I mean, the food business is I think hard, but the longer you are in it, the more some of it becomes easy. The margins are bad. I mean, financially, I can't advise anyone to get involved in the food business, but it is fulfilling. I've met a lot of amazing people through being at the store. It's great to be a host. It's great to serve, to see the conversations that jump tables when people eat in. So COVID was a bummer when people started.
Yep.
In many ways, not eating out as much, and that pattern has continued. I mean,
yes,
my business is doing better than ever financially, like in terms of the number coming in. I think the numbers of people we're feeding, but the way we're feeding them is so different than it used to be. I mean, in the olden days, before we had a smartphone, people would come in for lunch rush, and then you had a couple hours where you could prep for dinner rush, and then we had dinner rush. This is maybe 10 to 15 years ago. There was a really predictable pattern in how people ate, and the past few years it's gone all out the window. People trickle in and out all day. We're getting the Grubhub and DoorDash orders all day. I think more people eat alone, and I don't think that's good for us collectively. I mean, if you're eating healthy, obviously it's better to eat healthy alone than to eat junk alone. But I think when you have a conversation at a table with your partner or your friends or acquaintances, even, it slows down the digestion. You get to stimulate your mind a little bit. And I'm guilty of eating alone and, eating TV dinners and so forth. I don't want anyone to feel guilty about it. It's just if we go back to the traditional ways people lived, I think that's something that we've lost, and it's accelerated a lot in recent times.
Yeah.
The family meal, or just kind of eat whatever, whenever. So it's,
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a big proponent of everybody sit around the table and have a conversation, because that's what we always did.
Yeah,
that's what we always did, and I thought that it it really brought people closer together. The way I thought about it was when I started hearing that some people I knew, all went to different rooms for their meals. The kitchen is like the pickup place, and then you all go off and do the things you're doing. Like that might be all the time you spend with people for that day, is just sharing time over a meal. And it's hard for me like to see people disconnected from each other. Again, I'm not trying to make anybody feel bad either, but it's like, I think that there really was, I was never a big etiquette guy, to me, a fork's a fork, you know what I mean? But, I was always, but as I got older, I came to really value just sitting down with people and talking to them for a meal. You eat for 30 minutes, you talk for 3 hours, I mean, and who has that kind of time anymore? But there really is something to that.
And that's something, what you're doing with the podcast, I think, is a good stand-in for that. I think there's still always something additional we get from the in-person, but it's nice to chat virtually with a friend and have new friends that can tune in and ask questions. Like this is something I've only gotten into very recently, the podcast phenomenon. I mean, some people do these things for like 3 hours, and it's like, oh my god, and they do them multiple times a day. I was like, I guess you're making a living off of that, because how can you do that? But an hour or two here and there, I think in a way we are connecting still, just it's not always with people right around us. And I think that's a big contributor to the polarization in this country, people feeling isolated and committing these terrible violent acts. The news is just always full of awful things people are doing, to other people, not even, that we know institutionally the animal thing is bad too. But it's something that maybe if there was more community and commonality and togetherness, it's probably a little harder to, I don't know. I don't know what the stats are on crime, so that actually maybe more people do still murder people.
No, you're so right though, because, while the human race, somebody said that a person is capable of committing either infinite acts of good or infinite acts of evil. And, I think that's spot on. So there's always been an issue where human nature is concerned, but it's hard to hate somebody that you like. It sounds like a stupid statement, but it's so true. You like somebody when you get to spend time with them. Some of my favorite work in overcoming racism has been like, I don't know if you know Daryl Davis, but he is if you look him up, he's very fascinating. He makes for a very interesting night of reading. But he was a blues jazz artist, for a life career, middle-aged man who happened into a situation where he got to sit down with who at the time Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. And in the years since then, he has converted over 200 members, and they've all given him their cloaks or their robes, which he keeps as trophies. And it's like, but it was, overcoming stereotypes through conversation. And his premise, which he talks about on podcasts and which I share with my students sometimes, was, how can you hate me if you don't know me? It's like, how can you justify it? You've never known me. You can't say you hate me. I'm a stranger to you. And so that's always been a big object of fascination for me as well. It's like, the more we're just together, the more we talk, the more we see each other, the more we just know each other. It's like, it's hard to grab a gun and shoot somebody if that's somebody you actually care about, right?
Yeah. And you see this with animals too, that, sometimes there's a documentary called Rowdy Girl. Some Texas cattle ranchers went vegan. They have an animal sanctuary now. We screened it at the Millville Library. And one of the neighboring cattlemen, who seemed like a really nice guy on the show, on the film, he brought a calf to the sanctuary and said, I can't send this one to slaughter. I bonded with him. His mom passed away when he was little, and he wound up having to take care of this one. And he's like, he's just like my dog. He sees me. It's not. He made the leap and recognized that little calf as an individual that he had a bond with, and he couldn't kill him.
That's right.
But the rest, and you see that this even every once in a while, you see the news, oh, this, cow escaped from a slaughterhouse or whatever. And people are like, oh, good job. That one cow must be special. But in fact, they all are. It's just the rest of them aren't as lucky, and you don't see them. You don't get to know them and know their story. So, I think animal sanctuaries are really important to get to, see the animals on their own terms, and talking with our fellow human beings is really important to see each other as more than a, pronoun or gender or
something to be knocked down.
All that stuff that's easy, to be like, well, they're not me, so they're one of the bad ones. Come on.
Oh my Lord. And just to cycle back, my favorite food for a season of my life was a hamburger. I'd do anything for a burger. You know what I mean? I would have like 2, 3 at a time. But after I was vegan, so back up. After I was vegan, I was, of course, missing them a little bit. And I saw this video of a woman at an animal sanctuary playing her ukulele for a big old cow. She was just serenading the cow, and the thing leaned in and just put its head right in her lap because it liked the music so much.
Yep.
And I was like, good God, I can never eat a burger again. Like, I like cows. That cow just wants to listen to some music. I know how that is. I relate to that.
Yeah. That's very well. Cows like music. That's been a farmers, for generations have seen that. It's
I know.
Now you can have your burger and eat it too. You go get an Impossible Burger once in a while. It's junk food, but once in a while, I don't think it's going to hurt you. I won't know if I'd eat 3 of them at a time, but if you don't eat them for a while, you have one, and one's probably a lot because they're really calorically dense. But most of the time, the veggie burgers and things. I tell you, when I went vegan, close to 20 years ago, there weren't a lot of vegan ice creams then, and I liked ice cream. But after finding out about what was done to the dairy cows and the whole dairy industry, I was like, I don't want to support that anymore. I don't want to buy that stuff. And I just didn't think about it. I didn't miss it because, we are creatures of conscience. We can be. And if we embrace that, what some people say is so hard becomes just not even easy, but it's like not even an option. You don't think about it anymore, just like most of us don't think about like eating our neighbor or something, like
that's right.
Like, you could, but it's not in your active consciousness as a decision you make every day. It's that's just removed from the realm of, should I do this or that, And then it's like, well, do I buy soy milk or almond milk? Maybe that's a debate I have to have every time I go to the grocery store now. Right. But I'm not looking at the cow's milk. That's not food anymore. That's right. I guess if you have a baby calf, you can feed it to them. But it's really simple. And I don't want to disrespect anyone's individual challenges because different people do run into different snags on their journeys.
Sure do.
Some have health issues, maybe because they couldn't figure out what to eat, or they have family issues, that they might not have a supportive household, or their partner might not be into it, or their circle of friends. People absolutely do run into challenges, and they hit for some than others. I mean, when I went vegan, I sort of was hanging out with a different group of people than I had been a few years ago. And maybe a few years ago with that group of people, I might not have been strong enough to say, oh, you know what? I just watched these documentaries. I see what's involved in producing this food. I don't want to support it anymore. I don't know. Maybe I wouldn't have made the leap at that time. So the support, being in the right supportive environment, I think is critical. I didn't want another label. I didn't want to say, oh, I'm vegan now. I didn't want to have conversations with everyone all the time. I just wanted to not buy products that hurt animals anymore. But I knew that people were going to make an issue out of it because they feel challenged. They say, oh, well, you're not eating that? Well, I can eat it, right? It's okay if I eat it. Because I think they feel subconsciously bad about it because they know. And now more than ever, you know, I mean, my Instagram feed shows me pictures of animals, be terrible things happening to animals, institutional bad things, not, you know, just individual people doing sadistic, cruel things. That happens too. And when you have an industry that's dependent upon slaughter,
Right.
you know, that sort of enables it to happen even more. But just even if things go as planned, it's awful.
Yeah.
And I think people need to see that more. You know, it's until it stops. You know,
Yeah.
the different, you can't change something without people knowing about it. You know, the labor movement. You know, people went to group to talk to the workers and say, "Hey, it doesn't have to be like this. We could
That's right.
strike." You know, and
That's
until you have that idea, maybe you sometimes you need the idea first in order for some things to happen. So it's not an easy conversation to have, I think, and I would never want anyone to feel guilty about just them doing what was the default. But I think it's also important that we keep putting it out there and keep having the conversation so people can have the tools to make that change, because the change is coming systematically to an extent anyway. You know, like environmentally, the big corporations have their feet in both camps. All the big dairies are investing in alternative milk technologies. All the big meat producers are investing in alternative meat technologies. So the people who have a lot of money already are going to be just fine either way in the long run. And, you know, they can see, oh, well, yeah, this is more efficient. We're not going to have protesters anymore. You know, they're not going to run into the different inconveniences of killing for food that some places do now. It'll be interesting to see what happens with all the shakeups in government these days. How that impacts factory farming, because you know, previous administrations had passed really strict anti-ag gag laws. So, you know, if you broke into a factory farm and filmed things, you know, that was like a terrorist act, not just spying or whatever it would have been before that law was passed. And the penalties are much stricter. So they try to make an example out of people. You know, oh, you broke into a facility and you rescued, you know, 3 birds. What was the dollar value of those 3 birds? You know, $15, but you're going to go to jail for 5-10 years, you know, for committing a terrorist act by rescuing sick and injured animals and giving them medical care. You know, I think this is one of the benefits of the social media technology and the internet and all that now, is that it's harder to cover that stuff up. Although we must be wary, as you know, censorship and, you know, big tech companies saying, well, you know, maybe people aren't going to see this anymore. You know? So that's why it's important to have the conversations in small groups and individually too, because then there's something against what your social media feed is showing you.
That's right. Can you believe we've been going for almost an hour already?
Oh, no kidding. And we started a little late too.
Yep.
Okay.
We can tell you, I told you we can talk. Give us a camera, give us a mic, we'll make it work. But my question, to piggyback off your point, was, what do you think are the next steps for us locally?
Oh man, let's organize. Let's plan events. You know,
all right. I like that.
Yeah, and just be out there, have the conversations, try to be a positive force in the world. I know you do that, you know. And it's sort of it's contagious, you know. Sometimes people come in a bad mood, and you give them a smile, and you can turn their day around, and then turn someone else's day around. I think it can be that way with good information and good intentions in all realms. We just got to keep going on and doing the best we can. And we've got to acknowledge everyone else's too, really. So it's just sort of you meet people where they are, and you know, hopefully we steer this behemoth of human civilization in a more positive direction, because there's a lot of forces, you know, at work keeping it bad, you know, in a lot of ways. So it's not enough to just say, well, I'm going to do my thing and that's cool. I think those of us who are in a position to try to, share and spread things, we really need to. That's
I
my
agree.
take. Yeah.
Yep, I agree. I love talking to you. I swear. I love your passion, your drive, your dedication, and obviously the lifestyle. I mean, veganism saved my life. That's a topic for a whole other a whole nother video. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I stand here a much healthier person coming back from what could have been a deadly illness because of veganism. And it was so funny, I went back to my doctor after embracing the lifestyle. I hadn't consulted with him first. So, I went back and I was due to have a prescription refilled and I asked him, so go ahead and correct me though, because I know I made a couple of bold moves recently, but what do you recommend with all your medical experience? And he just goes, oh yeah, well, all the new research is saying that a fully plant-based diet. I'm like, oh, great. I'm way ahead of you, doc.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I'm glad you're doing great. You look very healthy and vivacious. So.
Oh yes, but looks can be deceiving. No, I'm kidding. But no, it is always great talking to you, and I love talking nutrition. This is a relatively new thing on the podcast, but honestly, I think that it's very interesting to the listeners as well, and certainly to me. So it's always great when you come on.
Thanks so much for having me.
You got it. Well, folks, if you want to support Eric NYMAN, who is a strong advocate for the fair and just treatment of animals, and that we should all thrive and allow our world to thrive with a healthier environment and healthier lifestyles for us all. Or if you're just feeling experimental with your diet, I encourage you to check out Wildflower Vegan Cafe. It is in Millville. It is probably my favorite restaurant in the entire world. I'm just saying. No shade to anybody else. Every time I go in there, I'm like, who cooks like this? Honestly. So what do you want to tell us? Maybe 3 things they can look forward to if they stop by the shop?
Joe just made a coconut custard pie, which was phenomenal. I hope he does that again later in the week. I think we're going to do a lasagna, like a white lasagna later in the week, cashew cheese, and probably like a grain bowl tomorrow. Something, some local asparagus, and while it's in season, got to use it, So, but really, everything's a safe bet. That's why we keep a small menu, because it's easy to make sure it all stays fresh and good.
Absolutely. I love small menus. Eric, it's been a blast. Thanks for coming on the show again. Look forward to our next time. And like we've been saying, maybe we'll do a cook-off or we'll do something on site so people can see your restaurant on camera. I think that would be pretty awesome this summer sometime.
Okay. Next one, we'll do it there.
Absolutely. It's always great talking to you. All right, folks. Thank you for watching, and good night.